All right, we're live. Duran, live chat 22. How is everyone doing out there? If you can hear me, let me know in the chat window. I hope everyone's doing okay. Can you guys hear me all right? Are you guys out there? Are you with us? This is our live chat. It's a Monday live chat. And there were some questions that some people had. All right, thumbs up from Thomas. Great, Thomas. Thank you. Christopher, great. From St. Louis. Thank you. Hello, Pax Bella. Thank you. All right, so there are some questions if we're going to be switching up the time from Sunday to Monday. We're not sure. We're just playing around with some times right now. We'll see what comes of it, and we'll see how this one goes on Monday. Our goal is just to reach as many people as we can and try to get as many people to participate with us. So hopefully this live chat goes well on Monday. Hopefully it'll go well on Sunday, and any other days we do a live chat. Hopefully we'll have you all with us because we love having you guys here. We really, really do. And of course, with us on this chat, we have live from sunny Moscow. I don't know if it's sunny.
Hardly.
Sunny. We have the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing today?
Very well. Actually, we had a bit of a blizzard today, and we've had a very, very, very snowy winter. Snowy and wet, and not much sunshine, unfortunately.
All right. Johnny Gaming 100 says, hi. Johnny has a really good YouTube channel. Shout out to Johnny Gaming 100. Good for you to join us. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle from London, live from London. How are you, Alexander?
I'm very well. Delighted to be on the show. Here the sun is shining and it's all bright and clear. Very unusual for London in January, I should say. Usually it's dark and overcast and wet and windy and rather.
Okay, well, there's sunshine in the UK, so that must be Putin must have done that. We have to look into that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. Yes, always Putin's fault. All right. Lydia, good afternoon from Cyprus. All right, Lydia. Hello from Cyprus. Hi from Scotland, from Arizona. All right. Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. Guys, let's get to some of the questions that people sent out before we started this live chat. And let's begin with, let's see here. Let me go through the questions. We had quite a lot. From Michael Julian. Let's go, Alexander. Should Russia strongly extend explicit messages to Israel that they will take out Israeli Air Force's entire arsenal of planes, helicopter, gunships, radar equipment, etc., should they continue to attack Syria?
Well, first of all, they shouldn't, and they won't,
and they won't
because they can't. I mean, this would be a titanically huge escalation. Russia has never guaranteed Syria against Israeli attack. The Russians have consistently said that there is a state of war between Syria and Israel, which has existed ever since 1948. Russia is not involved in that war. They have good relations with Israel, which they want to keep. And they, of course, have excellent relations with Syria. But the reason Russia is in Syria is to fight terrorism there. And that involves supporting the Syrian government. And they've made to the Israelis very clear repeatedly what their red lines are. Let me repeat them. They are no interference in the Syrian army's anti-terrorist operations, no attack that threatens the lives of Russian personnel, and no attempt by Israel to overthrow the Syrian government, launching attacks on the Syrian government that would put its survival in jeopardy. What happened in the autumn was that the Israelis launched an air attack in northern Syria, which led to the downing of an Ilyushin 20 Russian surveillance aircraft that crossed Russia's red lines. The Russians reacted very strongly. They provided S-300 anti-aircraft missiles to the Syrians to increase Syria's ability to defend itself from air attack without this causing problems for the Russians. But that did not extend to a carte blanche to the Syrians or to a guarantee to the Syrians to protect them against Israel. They will not do that, and one should not expect them to.
The only thing I would add to that is that Russia may look down its menu of assets that it might be able to introduce to Syria on behalf of the Damascus government. But no, Russia would never create a state of war with Israel. There's no reason for it, none whatsoever.
Yeah.
All right, great. And let's take a question from Imre to Peter. Peter, in a video, Alex casually mentioned President Gabbard. What chance do you give Tulsi Gabbard, Assad apologist, two-time Iraq vet, Hindu mixed-race woman, for 2020, considering she is not a corporate tool? If the U.S. was a democracy, it would be a given, but it is not. What's your take on Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, I don't think she really has any chance whatsoever in getting the nomination. But what makes her candidacy interesting is that she's going to force issues that the mainstream Democrats do not want to talk about. And that will be primarily foreign policy. And so it's very interesting to me, even though I don't think she really has any chance whatsoever in getting the nomination, because she just won't be given the financial support, okay? I mean, Donald Trump could use his own money if he wanted to, and because the liberal media found him so entertaining, he got hundreds of millions of dollars of coverage for free. They will not do that for her. So I think her candidacy is interesting as far as that she's going to be bringing up some uncomfortable questions that a lot of actually Trump supporters are interested in. That's kind of an interesting cross fertilization. And we have new members of Congress that are questioning America's relationship with Israel, questioning America's relationship with Saudi Arabia. So she will stir up the mix, and I look forward to that. I think it's something that needs to be done because corporate media and the established Democrats obviously are in lockstep, and they want to control the narrative. And because she is a woman, because she is a veteran, she does have political experience. You won't be able to completely ignore her. They'll do their best, but she's going to be there. And they're going to have to contend with her. So she's more of she's going to stir up the narrative, not necessarily the primary season.
All right, great. Hello from Montreal, from Sydney, from Arizona, from Australia, from BC, Canada. All right, great. Great to have everybody here. Yes, Johnny Gaming 100. Yes, subscribe to Johnny Gaming's channel. Absolutely, absolutely.
Hi, Johnny. How you doing?
Johnny, Peter, and Alexander also give you a big thumbs up and a big subscribe. And let's go, Alexander. From James Ashby. While the Russians, Turks, Yanks hold meetings about what to do and the future of northeastern Syria, where is Bashar al-Assad in all of this?
Well, he is playing a very careful game, as he has consistently done throughout the Syrian conflict. Now, whatever one thinks of Bashar al-Assad, he has his critics, he has his opponents, he has all sorts of people. The man does understand diplomacy, and he does understand tactics, and he knows that you don't rush in headlong into a situation like this until you have all your back covered. So he is looking to the Russians at the moment to help him out by sorting out the Turks for him. He's looking to the Iranians to help him with training and military expertise and all of those things. And he's working with the Kurds to persuade them that, look, he is the guy who can, in the end, protect them from the Turks, because the Turks are talking about moving into northeast Syria, and Turkey is the enemy of the Kurds in a way that Syria is not. So that is what he is doing. His ultimate objective, which he has been completely public about, very straightforward about, is to restore the Syrian government's authority throughout Syria. He does not want to see these sort of semi-autonomous or autonomous or foreign-occupied regions in places like Al-Tanf, where the United States has a base on the Jordanian border, the Kurdish areas in the northeast, Idlib province, which is a nest of terrorists, jihadi terrorists in the northwest, and of course Afrin and this Turkish security zone that Erdogan is intent on creating. And he's going about it, in my opinion, in a very careful and sensible way. He's built up his army, he's forged a good relationship with the Russians, he's playing this game in a sensible, measured fashion, and I predict that in a year's time he'll have got all he wants.
And just to add on to it, if he were to push forward against any of one of his foreign foes or proxy foes, that would ensnarl him with that proxy foe's coalition or backers. And so Assad is playing the smartest game in town. If your enemies are fighting each other in a circular firing squad, just get out of the way.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly. I put it very well.
Excellent point. Guys, smash that like button, click that like button, subscribe, get the word out about the channel. Let's get more people on here. Thank you for everyone who's joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Peter, we have a question from Liam's Political Vlog. Do you think that the deep state will attack Iran like Bolton has always been saying?
Well, there's contingencies. They're constantly planning for it. And just because you plan for something doesn't mean you go through with it. I am convinced, even though I trust the American military as far as I can throw them collectively, they know that a outwardly aggressive attack all out on Iran would be a security, military, humanitarian nightmare for the entire region. No one would be spared. No one. Not Israel, not Saudi Arabia, not the Emirates. Everyone would feel tremendous pain. What's going on now? If you look at the tour that Bolton and Pompeo went on, you read what they have to say. I mean, as bizarre as it gets sometimes, they're still counting on internal regime change. That's what they're putting most of their resources behind, and not overtly. I mean, they'll rattle the saber and all, but we've heard this rhetoric for decades. The Iranians are certainly used to it, but I don't think at this point in time that they would want an all-out military assault. I mean, that's essentially creating World War III. The IMF is coming out with its estimates. I mean, growth is slowing down in the global economy. China's slowing down a little bit. And now you want to take one of the major oil producers out of the mix, where if an attack on Iran, you'll essentially see Saudi oil fields on fire. So, I mean, the consequences are so grave that they're very difficult even to contemplate. But like I said in the beginning of my answer, of course, they're developing scenarios where if they got to the point where there would be a certain array of events where they would pursue that, of course that's there, but it's on the planning boards, right now, whiteboards right now. I don't think we're close to it. I mean, if Bolton could get that scenario put into place, I mean, he would do it in a heartbeat. But I find at this point in time, I would find that extremely difficult to put together, considering, with the Khashoggi affair, failure in Syria, indecision in Syria, the Turks would not be on board because they have their issues with the Kurds. There's so many things right there. NATO wouldn't be united. Bolton's dream is very fanciful. Unfortunately, he apparently has a lot of influence.
All right, thank you, Peter. And we have a question from Afro Priapus. Alex, please talk about Lindsey Graham visiting Turkey this week and China going to the other side of the moon and Chinese space ambitions.
Right. Let's talk about Lindsey Graham going to Turkey, because, of course, he's turned out to be the major critic in the Senate, at least the Republican part of the Senate, against Donald Trump's pull-out decision. So he goes off to Ankara. He has apparently a cordial meetings there with various Turkish officials, including, I believe, Erdogan himself. Everything seems to be cheerful and good, and absolutely nothing has changed. Lindsey Graham does not make US foreign policy, nor can he actually influence Turkish foreign policy either. I think the decision to pull out of Syria has been made. I don't think there's anything Lindsey Graham personally can do to prevent it. I gather that US troops are slowly moving out, and we saw an announcement, I think it was yesterday, from Erdogan, that the Turkish army is prepared to move into Manbij. The people you need to look at to understand what is going to happen in Syria is not people like Lindsey Graham. To some extent, it's Pompeo and Bolton. But the really big meeting, the crucial one we should prepare for now, is the meeting on the 23rd of January between Putin and Erdogan, which is going to happen in Moscow. That is where the real diplomacy is going to take place. Now,
okay, but before you go to the Chinese there, Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. What I think is actually something very different in play here. I think because Bolton was given the snub. Erdogan is playing it safe. He's going to have this envoy, and he's just going to explain to Lindsey Graham in person what he should tell his fellow Republican in the White House, Donald Trump. I think he's more of a conduit because he doesn't make foreign policy. He can be very vocal about it and have very strong opinions. But I think it's just more of a courtesy call, and Erdogan, again, always playing the balancer.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that brings us to China and the moon.
And that brings us to China. Now, I mean, you know, first of all, a very impressive technological achievement by a country that has made colossal strides technologically. That is it. I mean, it's a great achievement. It's a great scientific achievement, perhaps one that holds a great deal of promise. But I've been reading some utterly bizarre articles in the Western media treating this as some kind of a threat. I don't see it as any kind of a threat at all. I mean, the Chinese are sending probes to the dark side of the moon. The United States sends probes right through the solar system. I believe one of them has actually left the solar system. The Russians are involved in all kinds of things. Space exploration has been going on for a long, long time. I think we really need to stop worrying about this. I mean, I just don't understand, frankly, what all the nonsense is about. I mean, I was reading, I think it was in the Daily Telegraph here in Britain, about how this all spoke about, you know, the Chinese setting up bases on the far side of the moon. I think this is crazy, surreal stuff. Congratulations to the Chinese. Yeah. Well done for them. Another sign of the enormous progress their country has achieved in the past 40 years. It's something to celebrate. And that's all.
The interesting thing is, it's almost, for Western media, and I guess the political elites to some extent, it's the Sputnik moment, okay? Because China's done something that no one else has done, and Alexander Mercouris started off with technological advances, and that's the message. That's it, okay? It's we can do it. That's the message that they're sending. And of course, it's something of great national pride for the Chinese, because they've done something the other great powers haven't done, because they've come late to into space exploration, and they're showing that they can not only catch up but surpass. And so it is really a moment to herald Chinese technology. And I'm sure we're going to get to 5G in a matter of minutes here, okay?
Yes, we are going to get to 5G, but first Melville would like to know what's going on with Russia and Japan in the Kuril Islands.
Oh, that's heating up again. Unfortunately, the Japanese are trying to pull interestingly, if the Americans in to be part of the negotiating team, which has infuriated the Russians. They see no reason for that. We have to remember the ultimate goal. It's not just the islands, but it is to sign a peace treaty ending the Second World War between Japan and Russia. There've been lots of talk over the years about the nature of the sovereignty of 4 islands, but primarily 2 of them. And they are Russian sovereignty, and Russia doesn't trade in sovereignty. And of course, it's a lingering issue for the Japanese. So we get these flare-ups every few years. What's going on with the dilemma of these islands separating Japan and Russia? But I don't see it as a major impediment to other elements of the bilateral relationship at all. As a matter of fact, with things going on in good things happening on the Korean Peninsula, the Japanese are getting a little restless. They have, I think they've put to sea, or they've are about to put to sea their first aircraft carrier since the Second World War. They're seeing the shifting waves in that part of the world, and what they want to do is they want to get some resolutions before more change happens, and they realize a lot is happening. And I'd like to point out to our viewers here is that Japan is not a nuclear power, but it could, I've been told, a breakout period of 90 days. In 90 days, they could have a nuclear deterrent. They have all the pieces, okay? Breakout is when you put it all together, okay? So basically what is Japan's looking at the shifting waves in the region, and it is trying to resolve as many problems as it can, because that's the time when you can resolve problems, when things are in flux.
All right. Eliakim would like to know, going back to the 5G, Peter, Eliakim would like to know, is the Duran going to weigh in on 5G?
Well, I mean, I'm not a technological expert, okay? But essentially what the whole debate is that who's going to lead the technological advances moving forward? And China is pivoting to that direction. And that is something that just simply terrifies the United States and its coalitions of NATO and its allies around the world. Because the United States has been the preeminent, with its allies in Europe, the preeminent technological power. That is being challenged in a very serious way. And the implications of which are enormous. Not only for what we're doing on the internet, free exchange of information, but military technology, space technologies. You know, Donald Trump, has launched Star Wars 2.0. I mean, with 5G, it makes things a lot more efficient, faster, and better, whoever has it. So, that's going to be the new gold standard. And usually whoever gets there first can control it. So yeah, this is what the big debate is all about. The United States is all but warning and sanctioning Europe not to deal with Chinese technological advances, because they know the implications of it. Okay, the same thing, same thing with oil. I mean, Germany shouldn't buy Russian gas. Why? Why can't they determine their own security? Europe is not going to be allowed to determine its own technological security, if I can put it that way. So this is a big deal. Alex?
Do you guys worry about, real quick, do you guys worry, Peter, Alexander, worry about the health debate about 5G? Gober Wallace says 5G is equal to frying up humans. Do you worry about the fact that we're going to have antennas on just about every device out there on the street or in the home? Does that worry you guys?
Well, I mean, I think, when the nuclear age started, we could burn a hole in the time-space continuum, and then, when the Pakistanis and the Indians get a nuclear weapon, it's the end of the world. The internet is going to shut down all freedom of speech. We always hear these, these warnings. Okay, I'm not so concerned about being eradicated by 5G. I'm more worried about the people that control these technologies and control narratives and how we understand. They are essentially controlling how we understand reality. And with much more advanced technology, imagine what they could do. Now, I'm not trying to be a scaremonger, but I look at what they've done so far, and the people that are making the decisions are not in Washington, Berlin, Brussels, and London. It's in Silicon Valley. Okay.
Yes, I mean, I tend to Peter's view. I mean, I think that the health risks, I mean, I remember not so long ago, people were talking about the great health risks from mobile phones. Yeah. And that turned out to be exaggerated. And I think the same will be the case here. I am sure they will find a way to develop these technological things in ways that will not affect people's health. But can I just come back to something that Peter was saying? I think this whole business about China and 5G has the United States spooked. Because in its own self-conception, the United States is always a leader in these particular technologies. So the fact that for the first time, there is an actual commercial and trade competitor in a way that the Soviet Union never was. I mean, the Soviet Union was a mighty technological power, but it was not a competitor of the United States. China is, and China appears to have a lead over the United States in these very technologies where the United States considers itself preeminent. That, I think, is something that the US is finding very difficult to adjust to. And that's why it's hitting out in the way that we're seeing. I don't think you can do anything to stop Chinese development of 5G. I think 5G is going to develop pretty much in many places. I think the Russians are also, by the way, quite involved in this and quite interested in it from what I've understood. So I think we will see 5G evolving and developing, and I don't think there's anything the United States can do to stop it. And I think the fact is we live Today, in a united technological universe, some countries may have certain advantages in some fields for a certain period of time. Very quickly, others catch up.
All right. Happy Zorro, thank you for your super chat. It was good to see Putin in Serbia. Yes, we did a video on that the other day. Check it out. Yeah. And Asma has a question. One question regarding Russian foreign policies. And actually, I'd like to hear both of your guys' view on this. Almost all South American countries and North American and European countries are against Maduro, the Venezuelan president. Only Russia supports him. The Serbian president. Serbian people have been protesting against him and his government, and here comes Putin to award him. Isn't it strange how Russia always does the opposite of what almost all countries agree on and support whoever the Western countries do not? Is this deliberate?
No, I don't think it is deliberate. I think the Russians have their own foreign policy. They have their own interests in Venezuela, which is a major oil producer. Russia is a major oil producer. Venezuela is an important power in OPEC. And Venezuela, especially under Hugo Chavez, developed very strong trade and diplomatic connections with Venezuela. But I don't think the Russians are very interested or concerned with Venezuela's internal politics. What the Russians do strongly oppose is the interference of outside powers in Venezuela, as they oppose the interference of outside powers, meaning, frankly, Western powers, in most places, in nearly all places. And they are not alone in this. China certainly thinks so. India also thinks so. I think, in fact, it is the large-scale consensus in most places around the world. And if we're talking about Serbia, Serbia does have an important political conflict there. I mean, there's obviously people who are opposed to the present Serbian government, but liking for Russia and the good relationship between Serbia and Russia transcends those internal political differences within Serbia. You're not going to find many Serbs who are anti-Russian.
All right.
Well, and also, I mean, I think it's kind of common sense. I mean, Russia will be friends with people that want to be friends with it. I mean, if they reach out, I mean, I remember when the Bolivian president was here, and his politics are very left wing. Russia's politics is very conservative. It's not ideologically driven. So if people reach out, then Russia will embrace the hand, and sometimes they can play an important role in navigating international diplomacy. When Russia sits at the table, people have to contend with it. But this contention that Russia looks to pinprick the West, at every single moment. No, it's not the Soviet Union. Russia does not have global aspirations, not at all. I mean, if it wants to play a role for the ecology, the climate, technology, immigration, terrorism, these are things that affect everybody in the world, and it affects Russia. They will sit at the table. But just because something happens in one country in South America, they're going to mobilize their resources. It's just simply not true. It's not worth it to them. No, so, and Venezuela feels amazingly threatened. I mean, you have right now, you have the U.S. State Department recognizing a Supreme Court justice or a candidate down there as the legitimate president. I mean, what right does the United States have to do that? All right. I mean, I am not going to vouch for the electoral practices of Venezuela. It's none of my business. It's the business of the Venezuelan people. It's not the business of anyone outside to determine what is democratic and what is not. Okay. I mean, the United States for the last 2 years has had its hair on fire because Russian meddling in the 2016 election. And in the same news cycle, the United States is meddling in the affairs of other countries. I mean, the rank hypocrisy here is, it stinks to high heaven.
All right, we have a super chat from Penguins fan. Peter, 4 American troops killed in Syria. What will happen next?
Well, obviously, those that do not want to withdraw from Syria are pointing this out here. But ISIS has never done anything quite like this in that area. It doesn't have any penetration. So I mean, it's a very convenient event. I'm not saying I know anything more than it's been reported in the mass media, but it certainly probably made a better day for Bolton and Pompeo and Lindsey Graham, since it's already been mentioned. No, I mean, this actually, in a counterintuitive way, it actually proves why the United States needs to get out, okay? Let the Syrians, with their Russian allies and the Iranian ally and their ally Hezbollah, take care of these terrorists, okay? Because Western powers have been supporting terrorists in Syria for this entire time. It's Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, of course, the Damascus government. They're the ones that have been fighting it the whole time, and let them finish the job. The U.S. presence there is only giving oxygen for ISIS, Al Qaeda, and the other 31 flavors of jihadism.
Alexander, what do you make of what happened in Syria with the American troops?
I think Peter's got this about right. I think that in terms of ISIS, of course, ISIS doesn't need encouragement to attack Americans. I mean, ISIS attacks everybody wherever it can, pretty much all the time. But I think in this particular instance, I think that ISIS would probably want to slow down this withdrawal by the US from Syria.
That's a good point. Good point.
Because it wants as complicated a situation within Syria as it possibly can. The very last thing it wants is a situation where the Syrian government, with the Syrian army, is able to move across the whole of Syria, bring the whole of Syria under its control, and bring about very quickly the end of ISIS. So it is not impossible that someone within ISIS looked at this and said, well, how are we going to find a way of slowing down this withdrawal? Killing a few American soldiers might be the way, because that way that will put more pressure on Donald Trump to keep US troops in Syria on the argument that, you know, the job hasn't been done. I have to say, if that is ISIS's calculation, I predict it will fail. I don't think there's any possibility of Donald Trump changing his mind about this. And I think, if anything, Donald Trump is going to say to himself, look, we've seen some of our people die on this nebulous, you know, perpetual war type scenario. I don't want to see more young Americans going out there getting killed for some nebulous policy I don't really understand. Let the Syrians and the Iranians and the Russians sort this out. And I think it will probably harden his decision to take US troops out. So I think there might be an element of ISIS calculation there, but I don't think it's going to make any difference in the end.
All right, Alexander, a question from Vincent Verona on Syria is, what is your response to those who claim that the U.S. is backstabbing the Kurds by withdrawing?
Well, I mean, yes, is the answer. But more fool the Kurds to think otherwise. I mean, the fact is the Kurds use the U.S. to try and forge these autonomous areas in Iraq and in Syria. And the US used the Kurds in order to try to destabilize Syria and to put pressure on the pro-Iranian government in Iraq. Now, the United States is a very, very powerful country with global interests. It doesn't have to pursue a perpetual commitment to the Kurds, so it can withdraw. For the Kurds, of course, this is a far more serious issue because they've got nowhere to escape to.
Well, but they
were stupid to basically rely on this.
Yeah, I mean, there's never going to be a Kurdish state because they are in too many countries, and every single country where they are in do not want that to happen. But the shedding tears for the Kurds is a fool's errand. No, they have to sit down and talk to the Assad government. The Kurds and the Assad government have not actually been really at fighting odds during this civil war. And Damascus has made it very clear. And Russia's been there working with the Syrians to develop a new constitution, you know, if it's going to be some kind of autonomy, a federation. This is all on the table. You know, the Americans and their allies don't want to talk about this because they can't conceive of a post-war Syria that they don't create. Well, it's happening as we speak. The Kurds have have a room for maneuver. There are answers for them, okay? They can be part of a sovereign Syria. And that has been clear during this entire conflict. And from what I understand, those kinds of talks are happening right now. I can understand the different Kurdish factions trying to get the best possible deal during this time of transition. I understand it. I get that, all right? But, you know, Turkey doesn't want an autonomous Kurdish state. The Syrians don't. The Iranians don't. The Iraqis don't. I mean, nobody wants it. So they have to come and get a deal domestically in the sovereign state where they are now, okay? Exactly. And that's what's going to happen.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly right. That is a correct analysis. I mean, the Kurds need to be realistic. They haven't been fully realistic over the last few years. They had a very good run with the backing of the US, but with the region now stabilizing, that is running out. So now is the time to cash in whatever assets they have, except that the United States is not going to ride to their rescue and do the deals with Damascus and Baghdad that are probably there.
Because at the end of the day, as contentious as the relationship is, Washington does not want to lose Turkey as a NATO member, not in that region. The region is so very important. It could lose any other country in NATO. It wouldn't make any difference. Turkey, it would.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Penguins fan. Israel keeps striking Syria. You think the SAA will retaliate?
What they're doing is now it's a game of parlay. Seeing how far they can go. And, you know, Alexander Mercouris said it without actually saying it directly, is that the Russians are not going to be proactive in Israel's hunt for Iranians or real and imagined in Syria, because what they're trying to do is create a wedge between the Russians and the Syrians and the Iranians, and they're not going to fall for it here. Like I said in my first answer, that Russia can review its menu of options, and they may be able to increase Syria's capacity to defend its airspace. I'm pretty sure they will. That's why they didn't put the full Monty on at one time. What they're doing is they're trying to find the right fix. And as Alexander Mercouris put it, and he's right, and I hate to disappoint people, is that Russia is not going to not going to do everything that's necessary to keep Assad in power. No, Russia has made it very clear that and Alexander Mercouris mentioned all of them, okay? So the Israelis, they want to force, because they don't want to really get into a shooting match with the Russians either. Nobody's a winner in that one. It's really what the Israelis see, the U.S. leaving. They see real or perceived or imagined Iranian influence, and Israel is making a bid to show that what kind of Israel runs on the under the rubric of overwhelming force in deterrence, and this is an exercise in that right now. Okay, so I don't see. Everything is going to be incremental here, because Syria, there's too much at stake, okay? And of course you have Pompeo and Bolton roaming around capitals of the Middle East, and if something happens, they're going to want to force an escalation. And the last thing that the Syrians want is an escalation.
Yeah. All right, Alexander, we have a super chat from Afterglow, and let's switch gears. Let's go to France. The yellow vests. The French police are getting very heavy-handed with the yellow vests. Are the globalists really worried now?
Yes, I did. I absolutely think they're extremely worried, because, of course, what the yellow vests are doing in France is articulating grievances that are felt by many, many people in many, many countries. We've talked about this a lot, but I mean, I was reading recently about, stagnation of wages in the United States. There's great uncertainty here in Britain, which is why we've got Brexit. There's the rise of the AfD in Germany. There's all these things. And of course, the political elites around the world don't have coherent answers to these challenges. And where they lack coherent answers, they respond, as we have seen in France, with increasing repression. And I'm afraid that is exactly, the question has got it exactly right. I mean, there will be, I think, a concerted effort over the next few weeks in France to stamp this thing out, partly because it's a threat to Macron's position in France, but also because it is a bellwether of what is going to come elsewhere. So that's why we're going to see more repression, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, this is just the beginning. They're not going to be able to stamp it out. Oh, no. Okay. Because the jig is up, folks. This ritual called Western democracy is breaking down. It's breaking down because it was supposed to be a mechanism that would legitimize the elites in power. The people go through this ritual and they reaffirm the some kind of legitimacy for the power elites, and that is breaking up. And they are afraid. And France, through modern history, has been a bellwether for many things in the Western world, and I think this is just another iteration of that. So I don't think it's going to go away. The more force they use, the more it will go underground. It will get better organized, and it's going to make people more angry. People are legitimately angry because what they were promised is not being delivered.
All right.
That's exactly right.
All right. Thank you, Penguins fan, for your previous super chat on the Kurds. Interesting point that you make there on the Kurds and not having sympathy for them. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, it's real politic.
Well, no,
yeah,
but that's real politic.
It's real politic.
I mean, I'm not going to bring Western political correctness into foreign policy. Okay. I'm sorry the Kurds are offended, but this is geopolitics. And history has told you over and over again, you don't have the resources and the assets, and most importantly, you don't have the geography on your side.
Right. Excellent point. Excellent point. And we have a question from Liam Hicks. I don't know if you guys know about this story. I know a little bit, but not much. Duran, talk about the Matamoros strikes in Mexico. What do you think of them? These are the auto industry strikes. Have you guys been following this story?
Not very much.
No, I just see the headlines on Zero Hedge, but there's so much to read.
Yeah, sorry, Liam. I don't think we're covering that story too well.
We'll give you a rain check on that one, okay? If you send it the question in advance, maybe we could do a quick read for you.
Actually, yeah, maybe we'll even do a video on it covering it.
We might, because Mexico is an important country, obviously. It's near the United States. It's a big trading partner of the United States. It's got the new government, which is a socialist and left-leaning.
Left-leaning government, yeah.
Absolutely. And, of course, it's been racked by corruption and by a drugs war, which has been unbelievably violent. So, I mean, Mexico is certainly a country to be careful of. Go on, Peter.
I was just going to say Mexico does export a lot of people and drugs to the United States. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a big partner, yeah.
All right, let's see. Penguins fan has another super chat. Israel keeps violating Lebanon airspace. Why doesn't Russia give S-300s to Beirut?
Well, first of all, I mean,
they've been doing it for what, 30 years?
Yeah. I mean, Peter makes an absolutely valid point. I mean, it is important to remember, if we just go back to Syria now. Syria and Israel have been in a state of war since 1948. Israeli attacks on Syria, Israeli bombing raids on Syria have been going on one way or another for decades, long before the Syrian conflict began, long before Russia became involved in Syria during the conflict now. If I can just go back to some of the points Peter was making, I think what one can see both in Syria and in Lebanon is a gradual shift of the military balance away from Israel. I think we see a much better organized Syrian army than the one we saw a couple of years ago before the conflict began. It's now had an infusion of modern weapons, not just S-300 missiles, but also lots of other weapons. And of course, they've obtained combat training. And in Lebanon,
Alex, can I just finish up on Syria real quick here? Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. What's interesting also is that with this civil war that erupted, that turned into an international proxy war, the nepotism is gone from the Syrian military. The favoritism is gone. It's based on merit and merit only. And this is one of the liabilities that Arab armies traditionally have had with the advent of Israel. And Syria it's worn down, but they're tough, they're organized, and they've really learned a lot from this. And I'll let Alexander Mercouris speak about Lebanon, but who controls the airspace? That is the significant change that we've seen over the last few years. Go ahead, Alex.
Exactly. And I mean, Peter's right. I mean, you know, the major change, the greatest change within the Syrian army is obviously Syrian soldiers have always been brave, but the military, the officers are much better trained than they were. And of course, Syria now has a far more sophisticated command and control and general staff system than it had a couple of years ago. I mean, but they've also got all these advanced missiles, not just S-300s, but Buk missiles, Panzer missiles, all these weapons that we've seen. They are more successful in defending themselves from Israeli attacks. The Israelis are having to be much more careful in carrying out those attacks. And to answer an earlier question, yes, the Syrians do retaliate. The Israelis claim that, you know, they launched a missile into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights over the occasion of the last Israeli air raid on Syria. Of course, the Israelis say it was an Iranian missile, but there's no reason to doubt it was a Syrian one. And with Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hezbollah has repeatedly shown that it is a formidable military force, even though it is technically a militia, and that it is able to hit back in Israel if it needs to. Now, supplying S-300 missiles to Lebanon would be a gigantic escalation. It is certainly not something that the Russians would do, if for no other reason, because the Lebanese government, the government in Beirut, with which Russia, by the way, has good relations. First of all, it's not sought them, but secondly, it is not fully stable. Lebanon has had a civil war in the past between its various sectarian groups. There are not necessarily a stable government that is capable of using these sorts of systems. So I don't think there's any chance of Lebanon acquiring these systems of the Russians or the Russians supplying them. I don't think the Russians feel that there is any need for Lebanon to have these systems, given that, as I said, Hezbollah is perfectly capable of defending itself already. We are seeing a slow shift in the balance of power. It is not decisive. Israel itself is not in danger, but it needs to start thinking whether the peak point of its power has passed and whether negotiations, I mean serious, genuine negotiations with the Arab states and with the Palestinians are now in Israel's best interests, given that from now on, I think it's going to get harder and harder for Israel.
And that's why we have the bargain of the century being rolled out by Jared Kushner. I mean, you know, Khashoggi and all this stuff messed up Trump's plans. But Palestinians were mentioned here. And one of the things they want to do is it was a 2002 Saudi plan, actually, is that if Israel were to resolve the Palestinian problem, then all Arab nations would recognize Israel's a legitimate right to exist as a United Nations member. And you know, the Israelis have been kicking the Palestinian can down the road for generations now. And some of the snippets that have come out about the Kushner plan is essentially to reclassify what refugees are in terms of Palestinians, meaning you're not a refugee. So they get rid of the classification and then they get rid of the problem, which of course is this, you know, it's a turn of hand. And for Palestinians, well, you know, you're just going to disappear us. But these are some of the things that are coming out. But because of what's Syria, what's going on with Turkey, what's going on in Saudi Arabia, it's put all of these plans out of kilter, which really irritates a lot of anti-Iranian hawks because they wanted to get all these pieces together. And then Israel is taken off the contentious issue, you know, side of the ledger. And everyone, the Arabs and the Israelis, focus all their attention on Iran. That was the plan. Okay. And now reality kicked in and screwed up all of these things.
Yeah. All right. And Liam says, keep in mind that the Matamoros strikes in Mexico have really paralyzed the auto industry. All right. That's an interesting story. We'll actually keep an eye on that. And because Pat Hacker says, because Pat Hacker says that this might lead to more Asian auto imports. So we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you for bringing up that story to us, Liam. It definitely is worth a look, and maybe even video in the future. And another interesting story, Alexander, is obviously Brexit. What is going on in Brexit now? There was something. There was, I think Theresa May was going to reveal to us her plan B option.
Yes, which looks incredibly, well, I mean, perhaps Plan Z, I think, is perhaps more appropriate description, because we've had so many plans, but all these plans ultimately seem to me to come back to the same plan, which is that Theresa May is looking continuously to revive a deal, the same deal that was rejected by 230 votes. She wants to come back and bring it back. She wants to try and negotiate some kind of arrangement with the Europeans on the backstop, which the Europeans are going to refuse to do. And I think her calculation is, which I think is wrong, by the way, but I think her calculation is that the closer we get to the 29th of March, when Britain leaves the European Union, the greater the pressure on MPs in the House of Commons to vote her plan through will be. And at some point, the talk now is in mid-February, I think she's going to bring back essentially the same plan to the House of Commons again. And if it's rejected again, she'll wait a few more weeks and bring it back again in the hope that they will eventually pass it. That's, I think, the entire extent of her strategy. Now, if some of our viewers are reading the British media, they may be reading about all sorts of complicated and intricate parliamentary devices cooked up by pro-EU MPs who basically want Britain to stay in the European Union. There's been talk about amendments to the law to make a no-deal Brexit impossible or legally impossible. There's other ones that are talking about, well, there's an amendment by Dominic Grieve, which seems to be intended to trigger a second referendum. I have to say, I don't think any of these amendments, assuming they pass, will have the legal effect that their authors appear to think, because I don't think that you can change the Brexit date, the 29th of March, without full legislation, which would have to be brought in by the government. So I think that we should not be too bewildered by a lot of these plans and ideas and plots and conspiracies which are being floated by some people. The much greater danger, which is one that Alex Christoforou and I discussed about a week ago, is that you could see pro-EU MPs in the Labour Party and pro-EU MPs in the Conservative Party coming together, not with these procedural devices, but actually attempting some kind of a government or some kind of a change of government. I think that is a parliamentary coup. Exactly. I mean, that's what we described. That, I think, is a danger. I have to say it seems to be diminishing at the moment, because it's becoming very clear that there are lots and lots of MPs in the Labour Party, I stress, who are against this idea, because they represent constituencies where the majority of people voted for leave. So we have a complicated system. I think Theresa May's plan B is, as I said, no real plan. It's just a plan A. I think she's looking to run down the clock until the 29th of March in the hope that her plan will be accepted. And I don't think we should be too distracted by all these parliamentary manoeuvres, which at the end of the day, I don't think mean very much. That is my analysis. It is a complicated situation. Who knows? But that's what I think.
Well, in the last news cycle, we already had the European Commission already come out and say that Theresa May has got the best deal that they're going to get from the EU. Yeah. So, I mean, again, they just poured another large, cold bucket of water over her head.
All right, Peter, Alexander, have you guys been following this Covington Catholic boys' school issue?
Yeah, I was trying to get my head around it, but I couldn't find the time to watch the entire video. Okay, but it looks like the story is upside down. Again, the liberal media just gets triggered. I guess a kid, 16, 17 years old, smiling, wearing a MAGA hat, kind of glaring at Indian American, Indigenous American playing a drum. I mean, I didn't see it, and the guys are chanting and clapping with the drum. I don't understand the story at all.
Well, no, nor do I. And I have to say, yet again, I mean, this is becoming now, frankly, silly. I mean, it seems to me the liberal media are now obviously prowling for every conceivable story that they could put together and trying to create a scandal out of it. I mean, we've just seen the BuzzFeed story blow up in their faces, and now we have this, which I hesitate to say from the sublime to the ridiculous, because it seems to be more likely from the ridiculous to the even more ridiculous.
And
can we have some real news for a change?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have even got into the news cycle if it had been a New York Yankees hat. It never would have caught anybody's attention. It was the hat. The hat's a story, okay? Yeah. And then they built something around it. They built something around it that wasn't there.
Yeah, J. Crewbug says that it was all fake. That Forrest has the actual footage. Yeah, I saw the actual footage. It's about a 2-hour long video, and it is such a non-issue. A lot of people on the chat, I really like to read what you guys are saying. You guys are exactly right in the chat. It's such a non-story. And Peter, you're right too. If they didn't have that damn red hat, no one would be talking about anything. If that was a Yankees cap or a Nationals hat, no one would be reporting this story at all. But I mean, people are losing their minds. And
absolutely.
And the worst part about it, Alexander, this is actually interesting because it's a legal question, is that Kathy Griffin and a lot of these liberal Hollywood activists actually called to dox these kids. So to get all their information out there, addresses, who they are. And now the word is that they're lawyering up. What does that mean for all these celebrities, all these people that are actually actively telling people to dox these kids, get their information out, get their address, get their phone number? Legally, these are underage kids.
They're putting them in danger. They're putting that's child endangerment.
And these lawyers are taking this case pro bono, from what I understand.
I mean, first of all, I mean, it shows that all sanity has been thrown out of the window. That's the first thing. And the second is, I mean, one, it is the authoritarian instincts that we've been talking about so often, so-called liberals turning out to be the most extreme authoritarians and thought police types. I mean, it really is creepy, actually, and abusive, frankly. I mean, deeply abusive. I think people just need to stop this. I mean, it's doing so much damage to American society. I mean, not the story itself, but the response to it.
Is there a legal case if that kid is getting death threats? Because a lot of people in the chat are saying that he is getting death threats.
Absolutely, of course there is. I mean, I no question. I mean, first of all, he's getting death threats. The people who are sending those threats to him are committing criminal offences. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. And they should be investigated, and the police should follow them up. And of course, if one goes beyond this and one is looking at harassment of these kids in this way, then I think that is, I mean, there's probably multiple civil and criminal offences. But really, how have we got into this situation? I mean, it utterly baffles me.
It's an incredible story. All right, guys, we've closed 1 hour of the live chat. Guys, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notifications bell, buy a t-shirt at the Duran shop, send us your super chat. Thank you for everyone who's tuning into this live show. And let's go to a super chat from Penguins fan. Peter, why does the EU keep sanctioning Russia? Given the EU's own problems, which is true, the yellow vest problem and everything else. Well, why do they keep on sanctioning Russia then? Why are they so focused on Russia?
Because the U.S. is pressuring them to do it. And it has a lot to do with oil and gas, unfortunately. What they want to do is the U.S. wants to control Europe's energy policies and defense and intelligence, just about everything. And one way to justify that is to amplify the Russian threat. And you amplify the Russian threat, and then they go along with it. And you have to understand too that, you know, we talk about the social movements in France and Italy and Hungary, Poland. It's interesting is that, you know, the process of controlling, keeping this alliance, and we have to say NATO, is that you have elite capture. So the U.S. has been able to elite capture the militaries and, if not all of the political class, at least important parts of it. And this is what creates the division between the populace and the establishment. And we're seeing the friction get worse and worse, because basically Germany knows it knows what its energy security issues are, and they're being forced by the United States to act against their own interests. And the Germans, because of the size and the strength of their economy inside of Europe, they can push back, but it's very, very difficult after so many decades of being captured by the Washington Consensus, that it's very difficult for them. But they're beginning to realize that these things are really important, okay? Yeah. And with the European Union on very shaky ground, with Brexit going on as well here, the future of the security architecture is in doubt. I'm not saying it's in danger, but it's in doubt. And so Russia plays a very important role as creating the threat to, and it makes these elites acquiesce a lot easier. After all, it's the Russians, okay? Even though we know that, you know, oh, the Russians didn't meddle in the German election. How did they hide it? I mean, it ends up being insane. You know, the Russians meddled in the French election. The French security forces say there's no evidence of it. Okay, Dmitry Babich was telling me also is that Catalonia, the Russians are all behind that too. That's what the Spanish press is reporting. See, it's a threat. Okay, and they need that threat to keep the status quo and to maintain the power positions the elites have. That's just it. Russia is absolutely no threat whatsoever to Europe, and not the Baltic republics. We've talked about it before.
Yeah, Peter's absolutely. Can I just add one other little point, because Peter's right in all he said, but there is one other thing, which is a psychological thing. Why did they sanction Russia all the time? Because it's something they can do. They can't do very much else. Everything else the European Union is doing at the moment is failing. I mean, they can't run an economic policy. Brexit is in pieces. Their immigration policy is a mess. But by sanctioning Russia repeatedly, they give the appearance of action. And of course, it's action. I mean, it's not real action at all, because I mean, the latest sanctions, which were against 4 individuals, I mean, are just silly. But when you're not able to do anything, when you are in this situation of total stasis, as we call it in Greece, an impasse, at least it gives the appearance that you're doing something. So I think with some people, especially in Germany, if I have to be honest, I think this is an important factor, because they've invested so much in this EU project that at least they want to at least keep the appearance of some kind of action and movement, given that, as I've said many times, the EU is a bicycle, is a man on a bicycle. If it doesn't appear to be moving forward, if it stops, it eventually falls down.
Exactly. And if you look at, you know, every 6 months the EU is renewing sanctions, but look at the language that they use. Technically, it has to be unanimous of all members of the EU. But what do they do? They say there's consensus.
That's right.
They don't say what the murmurings are, what countries are against it, and basically there are countries that are just saying we abstain, okay, because they don't want to go against Brussels. But they're making it very clear that they don't see any point in these. And sanctions traditionally simply don't work on powers of stature, okay? I mean, I guess you can crush Panama, okay? You know, a small country, okay? But a large country, sanctions, there's no history of it actually being effective. And I'm really glad that Alexander Mercouris mentioned it, because it answers the question, something must be done! And that's what sanctions are, okay? And,
sure.
and by the way, you know, it ruined the Polish apple agricultural sector Okay.
Yeah,
Fine.
that's for sure. And Jerry Atalato says, why are the United States and the European Union placing self-destructive economic sanctions on Russia and seemingly everyone? Hint, Bill Browder, Magnitsky Act scandal. Do you think there's a point to that? That a lot of this did start with the Browder-Magnitsky Act?
It is the starting point. I mean, those were the first sanctions that were unrolled against Russia. And of course, it came directly after the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which was brought in against the Russians all the way back in the 70s, was repealed, and Russia joins the World Trade Organization. So some people in the Senate were looking, because they didn't like the fact that Russia was integrating finally into the world economy in a way that might make it a potential competitor for the US. We should never forget that these are always the agendas with the US. And we talked about 5G before and China being competitive there. Russia is potentially very competitive in all sorts of industries where the US is very strong, particularly aerospace. So when they saw that, they said, we don't want the Russians in. So they looked for sanctions. And of course, Mr. Browder came along with his claims about what happened to Magnitsky and what happened to various other things. And the US Senate seized on it. And we got this Magnitsky Act, which was the first sanctions. And ever since then, we've seen a rollout of more and more and more sanctions, which effectively reverse the decision to include Russia in the World Trade Organization and into the lifting of the Jackson-Vanik Act. But can I just say, I mean, just very quickly, I mean, of course, the problem with all of this is that in the 1970s, the world economy was dominated by the United States. It is not dominated by the United States any longer. So it is an attempt to stop Russia's economic development, which must fail because the world economy is such a different place now. Over to you, Peter.
Well, you basically said what I was going to say. And then throwing Russia out of the G8, and then we have the Russiagate. Okay, so this is all a continuum. Yeah.
This is a great question from Douglas. What do you think, Peter, of the recent impeach hit piece by NATO mouthpiece The Atlantic?
Well, don't they do it all the time? I mean, the one article that really, I think we discussed it on WhatsApp. Janusz Bogajski. What was the title? How to dismantle Russia? It was. Wow.
Basically, how to break him apart. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it was published by The Hill, and I remember I sent it to you guys. I said, get a load of this. Remember? I mean. And so here, Russia's being sanctioned for meddling in Western democracies. And then you have a major political online publication openly saying the destruction of the sovereign state of Russia and that other countries could benefit from it. China could grab a piece, Finland, Georgia, Ukraine, Poland. Oh, no, he didn't mention Poland. Dmitry Babich pointed that out to me. But I mean, just how open, now audacious, the destruction of the Russian Federation, and that passed. That's in mainstream media, and I'm sure because of the atmosphere, everyone gives it a nod. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yes, I mean, I should say that I think it's been some people's agenda. Not, I'm not saying many people, but there have been some people who have been advocating it in one form or another for quite a long time. I can remember people talking about this in the early 90s. When the Soviet Union broke up, there were lots of people who were looking forward to Russian Federation breaking up too. And of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski, came very close to advocating the same thing. So I think
Reckless Abandon, Alexander, in the chat, Reckless Abandon said the same exact thing. Brzezinski planned this in the early 1990s.
The 90s.
And then you guys are on the same page.
And then you had Madeleine Albright saying, well, why should Russia have Siberia? It's the world should be able to exploit Siberia. She said this. Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State.
Do you think something like that could actually happen?
No.
The actual balkanization, the breakup of
No. The Russians, The Russians will very, very vigorously resist it. I mean, most people in Russia regret now the breakup of the Soviet Union, but I mean, Russia is not the Soviet Union. It is a largely ethnically united country. There is very strong political and social bonds that unite its people. There is no prospect of that happening at all. I remember
not internally, and that's why that's why they always, the Georgians, what they do is they pick ethnic groups to try on Russia's border to try to incite instability. Okay, the Americans are doing it with the Uyghurs, for example. Yeah. Okay, this discussion, and that is an assault on China. Yes. I'm sorry, Alexander. Go ahead.
No, as I said, I mean, absolutely. I mean, they will try, but as I said, I don't think they will succeed. Just as they failed in the 1990s with the Caucasus. I mean, there was a big attempt, if people remember back then, to create the secession of Chechnya and all that, and it didn't succeed. And I'm sure the same will happen. Any attempt to try and pull that off will, in fact, result in a further consolidation of Russian society. And a greater determination to hold together, because they've seen the lesson of the 1990s is very strong for them. They see what happens if they fall apart. So no, I don't think there's any prospect of that at all. And I think that for people in the United States and elsewhere who indulge in these fantasies, it's they who are very dangerous, because what it shows is how viscerally hostile to Russia they are. And when they talk in that way, one wonders how far they're prepared to go. And if they see that this isn't going to happen, and that Russia's going to go and continue to get stronger economically, politically, militarily, well, one worries what their reaction is going to be.
Well, and also, when you look at the vast resources of Russia's east, Siberia particularly, Russia, I know this for a fact, as we speak right now, the Chinese are very, very interested in joint ventures for mineral extraction. See, Russia just doesn't want to be a natural resource country. It wants to create value-added goods, and so they will look for partners like China they'll be able to do that. So again, this visceral hatred of Russia is creating what is essentially become everything up to an alliance, a Russian-Chinese alliance. And thank you, Michael McFaul, and people like you that said that Russia would come begging on its knees to become part of the Western family and its institutions. Wrong. It didn't happen that way. The reverse.
Yes. But could I just also say something about this impeachment article in The Atlantic, which is, again, I come back to this fundamental question. If you're going to impeach the President of the United States, impeach him on something. I have yet to see these people who constantly talk about impeachment come up with anything. And when you have a president who is democratically and constitutionally elected and has the support of 40 to 45% of the American people behind him, I ask myself, what are these people trying to do? Listening and reading to this sort of thing, it's America's unity one needs to worry about, it seems to me, not Russia's.
Well, the thing is, what they're doing is Alexander. I mean, if Donald Trump is impeached, fine with me. I mean, I personally don't really care. But if you're going to do it, you better do it without breaking every single traditional, respected institution in the country. And that's what's going to be destroyed. Not the Trump presidency, but the presidency, the democratic process, the judicial process. And people will feel, millions, tens of millions of people will feel that something was stolen from them. They voted for Donald Trump for a reason. Impeachment will just reinforce why they voted for him in the first place.
65 million people. Yeah. Peter from Vincent Verona, do you think that NATO continued to exist after 1991 because NATO was never about communism, but it was about Russia, regardless of the regime type?
Well, look, I mean, NATO 1949 to 1980 89 to 91, you know, it served its purpose. Okay, I mean, fine. I mean, there was something called the Cold War. Okay, there were moments where the United States and the Soviet Union could have gone to war. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis is the most outstanding one. The crisis, most people don't remember now, the crises over Berlin. All right, and so, but well. It was about ideology then. I think that is absolutely true. You had the Soviet Union and leader of the communist world, the socialist bloc. We had many terms back then for that. So I'm perfectly willing to accept that. Okay, you didn't have out of area operations with NATO. I mean, NATO essentially didn't fire one bullet in anger. Okay. It's done a lot of stuff since then, and the reason why it was came into existence, that reason disappeared, and that was the Soviet bloc. So NATO is the one that's really changed a lot. It's become a very aggressive ideological bloc, and to give it a reason to exist, it needs a threat, and that threat is Russia. And you have enough members, like in the Baltic republics, that because they want more leverage, they want a better place at the table, will say that they're threatened, and they'll be very loud about it. And they're trying to get concessions from the United States, all kinds of arms deals. And again, you have elite capture, where the militaries that are captured, they're all trained by the American military now. American personnel are there. So, I mean, NATO it's a racket, okay, because it doesn't have a reason to exist. And so to continue its existence, it must continue to expand, and it must have an enemy to justify that, and that is Russia.
All right, we have a super chat from Penguins fan Alexander. Why Medvedev is in Putin's administration? He is filth from the Yeltsin era. He was a coward during the UN Libya debacle.
There are many, many people who say this about Medvedev. I mean, if you want to go to the site, the Vineyard of the Saker, for example, there's a long piece that today, which I was just reading today about all of this and about how Medvedev is this supposed Atlantic integrationist, that he wants to align Russia with the United States so that he leads some kind of a fifth column. I don't buy any of this. I think that Medvedev is a very loyal subordinate to Putin. I don't think he was remotely up to being president of Russia at a time of international crisis of the kind that we're seeing now. I mean, I just don't think he was capable of filling Putin's shoes. But I think personally, and this is a view which is unpopular with many people, I think he has been actually a fairly effective prime minister. His job, when he was appointed prime minister after the 2011 election, when he became prime minister in 2012, was to carry out a major fiscal consolidation, because Russia was running a budget deficit at the time, to bring down inflation, to improve the business climate in Russia, to straighten out the many, many problems that exist in Russia, and to lead a joined-up government. I think he's managed all this perfectly well.
Absolutely right.
I think he's done this perfectly well. I think he's worked very well. He works very well with Putin. I think that holding constantly this idea that Medvedev is some sort of, traitor or sub-traitor, I think this is completely wrong. And my impression of the Russian government, I've said this many times, I've said it in print. There's a long article I wrote about this back, I think, in March of last year, just after the last presidential election, when he was reappointed prime minister. I think Vladimir Putin heads a united team, of which Medvedev is an important part. I don't see any sign of Medvedev being any of the things that people say he is. That's my view.
Well, I say, essentially being prime minister, I mean, he's the head of the government, and what his job essentially is he's a super minister for the economy. That's essentially what he does. All right, and that's the most important thing that Putin wants resolved. and taken care of. Modernization, modernizing. That's what it's all about here, and that's what Medvedev is good. He's a reasonably competent bureaucrat. Okay, I thought his stint as president was less than stellar. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
He had to deal with Saakashvili attacking South Ossetia.
Yes.
He had the global financial crisis. We had the fiasco with Libya, where Russia abstained.
Yeah.
So I mean, and a lot of people don't remember a very important decision he made that affects me as I speak, is that we got rid of daylight saving time, and that really irritates a lot of people because it just made it darker and longer. Again, a lot of people don't like it. Okay,
Exactly.
You know, I mean, I can go to work in the dark, and I go home in the dark. All right. I go to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun is almost out of the sky. Okay, and so we don't like it. But Medvedev, I'd like to really stress Putin values loyalty a lot, and even people that make mistakes, he usually ushers them out in a gentle way, not a vindictive way. History will be kind to Medvedev. Because he isn't to Putin, and there is no other person like Putin. And yes, we'll do still more videos on who will succeed Vladimir Putin.
Can I just add one little point, which is, of course, the very first time I ever came across Peter Lavelle was around the time of the so-called reset, when I read a series of very, very good articles Peter wrote, in which he pointed out that this attempt by the Obama administration to play Medvedev off against Putin was destined to fail, and fail utterly, and completely misunderstood both the political realities in Russia and the personal relationship between the two men. So, Peter, I learned a lot from you reading those articles all those years ago. Yeah. And here we are now on a program together talking about Medvedev.
Yeah, I think I remember using the phrase there are two sides of the same coin. Yeah, I did write that. Yeah.
All right, Peter, from Mike V. I don't know if you've been following this story. I know about it. I have not been following it, but let's see if you guys can comment on it. Any commentary on the Press TV journalist being arrested in the U.S. last Sunday while traveling from Iran?
I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but yes, I have been following it. Apparently, we don't know. Maybe something's happened in the last couple of hours. She's being detained without being arrested. She's not being told why. We've learned that she will face a grand jury about a crime that has been committed. Now, maybe Alexander Mercouris can give us some more detail. I don't understand. She has to be deposed to answer certain questions about a crime that she's not being charged with, but they've detained her. I don't understand how this works, and in my mind, it seems to be playing fast and loose with. She is an American citizen.
She's an American citizen, yeah.
Until we know more, it seems to me that there's been a violation of her civil rights.
Well, I think that's very likely, and I think it's an ominous development because, I mean, it's difficult to know what possible conceivable crime a journalist could have committed as through this person's work as a journalist. I mean, it may be that there's some private issue, I mean, which we simply don't know about. But I can't help but think that this is very much part of the piece with all the various things we're seeing happening around the world with the United States. Finance officers, Chinese finance officers with Huawei being arrested in Canada, people being seized in, I can't remember where it was, but there was somewhere that we talked about recently. There's a Russian who was arrested there, and now a Press TV person appears to be arrested in the United States on some nebulous and undisclosed charge. And I don't like any of this. It seems to me very, 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 very disturbing.
The question is, I think, obvious to everyone. Is this related to her employment with Press TV, an American citizen working for Press TV, which, of course, I have reflected upon very deeply because I'm an American citizen that works for RT. So you could understand the chilling effect that this creates for journalists.
Well, indeed, exactly. And I think we must remember that, as I said, working as a journalist is a dangerous occupation in many countries. It'd be a very, very scary day when it starts to be so in the United States as well, the country where famously there is the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Well, Julian Assange may give us pause and completely rethink how effective and meaningful the First Amendment is once he is in American custody.
Absolutely.
Good point. Super chat from Afterglow. Alexander, read a lot recently of the desperate state of the Irish economy and how it could become the new Greece.
Well, I hope not for the Irish people. Ireland has had this very strange economy, or it's perhaps a strange economy, but of course, what it has done is that it has cut back very heavily on its taxes, on its business taxes, in order to attract these companies from the United States which want to trade in Europe. And of course, it's also racked up very, very heavy debts, which of course hit it very badly during the 2008 financial crisis. And that caused a major problem in Ireland. It was one of the so-called pigs. The various
I've forgotten
countries.
That term.
Yeah, really. Well, indeed. Well, it was the pigs, which are those countries with Portugal, Ireland, Iceland, Greece, and Spain. Those are the pigs, the countries that were very badly hit by the financial crisis. Ireland, as far as I understand, things got better because they did generally get better across Europe, thanks to QE and all the rest that the European Central Bank did. I get the impression that none of the underlying problems were ever solved in Ireland, just as they were not solved anywhere else, and that in fact the underlying financial and economic position in Ireland is now weaker than it was before the 2007-2008 financial crisis. We shall see.
All right. From Buckshot, Peter, Russia and Turkey are currently building a nuclear power plant in Turkey called Akkuyu. Is it possible that Russia wants Turkey to be a nuclear power?
No, not at all. Not at all. As a matter of fact, Russia has nuclear technologies for civilian use, and it's a real competitor to France and the United States. And no, I mean Erdogan. We've spoken so much about Erdogan. Erdogan would become a target. His country would become a target if it becomes a nuclear power. Okay, and every rational country knows that. Okay, the Saudis might one day entertain that thought. Okay, but it actually doesn't give you security. It gives you insecurity. So I don't see Turkey under any circumstances going down that path at all. No, Russia wants to make money. It's a sector of the global economy that has some really competitive advantages, high-tech technologies. So this is for civilian use, and it's a lucrative business. And the Russians are looking all over the world, everywhere, for this kind of business. Turkey happens to be one of those countries.
All right, we have some questions on the HR 25 Act. Do you guys know about the HR 25? I'm not that familiar on it.
No.
Can you name the act? Can you name what it is?
Yeah, it's the I've got it here. It's the tax reform proposal from the United States to replace all federal income taxes with a single broad national consumption tax on retail.
Oh dear. It sounds. I don't know very much about it, but I'm going to make a guess, which is that it's one of these tax reforms that is wildly overambitious, and in the present dysfunctional political system in the United States is simply not going to be brought into force. That's all I'm going to say about it, because I really don't know more. Okay. I don't want to start guessing on this kind of subject.
People always complain we don't talk much enough about Russia. Well, I don't know much about that, Bill, but I can tell you that in Russia there's a 13% flat tax. Okay, and before they implemented the flat tax evasion was rampant. And then when they put in a 13% flat tax, which is pretty reasonable, wow. The taxes started being collected. That was one of the terrible things that happened in the 1990s. Nobody paid any taxes, okay? And if the state needed money, it grabbed it away from Gazprom to pay everyone's bills, okay? So when they introduced that, now almost a matter of weeks, seriously, everyone started having a cash register. Before that, it was just, you didn't get a receipt. Now everything is a receipt, everything, all right? And they're fanatical about it. And I'm even talking about little kiosks and stuff like that, okay, where people do it. So tax evasion has gone down immensely. And I know many, many people that were very happy when it came in because they could get legal. And at the time period before, unless you were like an oligarch or something like that, the tax people just say that was the past. We leave it alone. They're dealing with the present system. So it works, okay? I pay it.
Yes. Can I just make one brief observation about the fiscal position in the United States? I mean, my impression is that, yes, there is tax avoidance and tax evasion in the United States, but the major problem is not that taxes are too high or too low. It is that there is very little discretionary spending now in the budget because Congress repeatedly commits the United States to large spending programs over many years that are not properly costed or coordinated with the federal government. So that the result is that the United States finds it very, very difficult indeed now to balance its books. And that problem is getting worse. What the United States needs, it seems to me, is not so much a tax reform. It needs a budget reform. It needs to get on top of its budget policies so that the federal government can finally, properly present a budget to Congress, which Congress approves and which will only go for the following year, not, as I say, for 10 or 15 or whatever years it is that Congress insists on particular spending programs.
Alex, I have to get ready for my crosstalk recording tomorrow. It was a good hour and a half with you guys. I have to get ready to ask questions, but I thoroughly enjoy answering questions on this venue here. So I'll see you either on a one-on-one or our next.
All right, Peter Lavelle in Moscow. Thank you very much, Peter. Take care. Me and Alexander will continue. Alexander,
absolutely, with pleasure.
All right, guys. Take care, Peter. All right, Alexander, we have a question from Penguins fan, a super chat. Any update on Maria Butina? She wanted to be an American so badly. What would she be thinking about the U.S. now?
Well, a very good question. I wonder. I am sure that her enthusiasm for the U.S. has diminished markedly, if there's any left. As far as I understand it, she's still in prison. And can I just say, of course, she's pleaded guilty. The only chance that she has of leaving prison anytime soon is that if there's some kind of diplomatic exchange with the Russians. I don't think there's any prospect of that. And there was all this talk a little while ago that this Paul Whelan person that had been arrested in Moscow on espionage charges was going to be swapped for her. Alex Christoforou and I did a video in which we cast doubt upon that. And we were absolutely right, because the Russians have said quite clearly that they are not swapping Whelan for Maria Butina. Maria Butina has been appallingly treated. As far as I'm concerned, she has committed nothing that I would recognize as a crime. I don't even buy this business about the failure to register under FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, because I cannot see that her actions were really those of a foreign agent. She was, as the questioner has correctly put, an enthusiast for the United States who wanted to live there, wanted to promote gun rights in Russia, and has found herself caught up in the present atmosphere in the United States, which sees anybody with a Russian connection who is active politically in the United States as a suspect individual and someone to go after.
All right, another super chat from J. Crew Bug. This is a great question. Alexander, can you comment on the latest events in Ukraine where canonical churches are being seized and vandalized? Is Constantinople's Patriarch Bartholomew ever going to admit his error? This is a huge story that's not getting much play at all, but it's broken up. Essentially, they have broken up the Orthodox Church.
Absolutely. I mean, this is. First of all, Bartholomew is not going to admit his error. I mean, he's doubled down on it, despite having nearly all of the Orthodox world line up against him. I mean, there are one or two churches. I mean, the United States, I think, is where most of the support for this comes from, unsurprisingly. But I mean, even Orthodox churches in countries like Turkey and Poland have now weighed in against this. And I want to make one very important point. I mean, it is a fundamental misconception to talk about a bid for independence by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church in Ukraine, the canonical Orthodox Church, never asked for this. It never asked for autocephaly. It was Bartholomew and President Poroshenko of Ukraine who agreed it between them. And in order to find a church which Bartholomew could recognize as autocephalous, but ultimately subordinated to himself, he had to gang up with various priests or ex-priests in Ukraine who were considered by the Orthodox community in general, not just the Russian one, as basically schismatics. So it was an extraordinary thing for Bartholomew to do. I, as a Greek and as somebody for whom the Patriarchate of Constantinople, it is the oldest institution in the Greek world, I feel deeply distressed and upset about this. And the question is absolutely right. We see growing violence, attacks on churches. Apparently, there was a fire in the Lavra, the key Lavra in Kiev, which is one of the major centers of Russian Orthodoxy. We see these violent ultra-rightist and neo-fascist mobs being organized. And of course, we see the today an admission from this new so-called autocephalous church that they are in close contact with the SBU, the Ukrainian security service, the Ukrainian government security service. So we see the Patriarch of Constantinople lining up with a Ukrainian government acting against the canonical Orthodox Church in Ukraine, allying himself with schismatics in Ukraine, and essentially facilitating violence against Orthodox Christians and Orthodox churches in Ukraine. I have to say, I would never have believed this thing possible. And I think that Bartholomew, if he's capable of such a thing, should be very ashamed. But he will not change his lines. He is doubling down on it.
How, I don't even want to say it. How was he influenced, Alexander? I was just about to say, how much was he bought off for? But why did he make such a decision?
Right. Well, this,
it's logically speaking, it's about as dumb as a decision as you can make.
It is a terrible decision, and can I just say, it is a terrible decision for the Orthodox world, not just the Russian Orthodox world, but for the Orthodox world.
Because if I could just preface it a little bit, Alexander, the Orthodox religion will not recover from this.
No.
For probably 20 to 50 years. I mean, it's a split religion now.
Absolutely. And I mean, because the senior cleric within the Orthodox world has behaved in this astonishing way. And of course, dare I say, as a Greek, it is a very, very bad thing for Greece. And I mean, it's created an issue of conflict within Orthodoxy, which is going to affect every Orthodox country, including Greece, which has important relationships with Russia. Why did he do it? Well, there are various theories. There's one which is very strongly promoted by Jim Jatras, who is a former State Department diplomat, an American of Greek extraction, who's very well informed and who writes very well about these things. And basically what he's saying is that Bartholomew was blackmailed because there was a scandal involving the reconstruction of a church in New York, an Orthodox church in New York, under the Patriarchate, and some of the money was embezzled, and this apparently affects some of the people within the Constantinople Patriarchate, and that essentially that was used by the United States as a tool to put pressure on Bartholomew. That may be true, I don't know. I just don't know the insides of the story. What I will say is this: Bartholomew himself and the Patriarchate of Constantinople, going back a very long time, have felt a certain rivalry with the Patriarchate of Moscow. Moscow commands the support of something like 200 million Orthodox Christians. Constantinople, which claims to be somehow senior to Moscow, commands the support of very few. So always people like Bartholomew in Constantinople have been looking for ways to take Moscow down a peg and to enhance themselves. And I can't help but think that this was part of the agenda behind this. Moscow, the Patriarch of Moscow, was very, very strongly opposed to some of Bartholomew's ecumenical ideas, ideas of dialogue with Western churches. Moscow has consistently been more conservative on religious matters than Constantinople has been. And at the same time, of course, he has challenged Bartholomew's claim, which is, by the way, a very dubious claim, that he somehow speaks for Orthodox Christianity. He doesn't. He is not an Orthodox Pope. This looks to me, perhaps there is a corruption side of it, but this looks to me more than anything else like a power grab by Constantinople in order to embarrass Moscow, somehow reduce its power, and enhance the position of the Patriarch of Constantinople at Moscow's expense. If so, it has backfired horribly by damaging, as you correctly say, Alex, the entire Orthodox community. And like you, I think it's going to take decades to repair, if it ever will. My own prediction, I think that Moscow will eventually go its own way. I think that they will say to themselves, we've seen what Constantinople can do. We're not going to have anything further to do with them. And the Orthodox world, which was previously united, will now split.
Yeah, it also shows to me that the West, the deep state, the neocons, they will stop at nothing to destroy everything about Russia that they could possibly think of, whether it's the religion, the social fabric, the country itself. I mean, they will stop at nothing to tear it apart. But we have a lot of questions, Alexander. Yes. Let's get to some of them real quick.
Yes.
On Ukraine, a lot of people are talking about Ukraine. What steps could any West-leaning government in Kiev take to recover lost provinces in Ukraine?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the first thing they need to do is they need to negotiate with the people who actually lead these provinces, who lead the two republics of the Donbass. Something they have consistently refused to do because they say quite absurdly that these people are Russian puppets, despite the fact that all the indications are that the leaders of these republics command a great deal of support. In fact, overwhelming support within these republics. And the reason they will not deal with them is because they understand that at a minimum, the leaders of these republics will demand a degree of autonomy, probably federalization. And the central government in Kiev is utterly and completely and implacably opposed to centralization, to decentralization, to federalization, because it fears that if federalization takes place, its project for a centralized, Western-leaning, Ukrainian-speaking Ukraine will become impossible. So they need basically to back off that. They need to accept that they need to speak to these people and they need also to work towards repairing their relations with Russia. Impossible to expect from any government in Ukraine now.
All right, so let's go to the next question from Douglas. Will Poroshenko win re-election?
You know, I wouldn't entirely discount it. If you look at the opinion polls, his support is absolutely awful. I mean, there's even a comedian at the moment who is out polling him. Because the point I want to say about Ukraine is that people always talk about Ukraine as if it was some kind of democracy, which I don't really think it is. I remember how back in 1996, at the start of the election campaign there, everybody said that Boris Yeltsin, who was polling in single figures, couldn't possibly be re-elected president. And we saw then that through every kind of device and rigging that you could come up with, he was re-elected. And personally, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if something like that happens in Ukraine again. There were local elections in Ukraine a little while ago, a few weeks ago. They didn't get much attention. But it was very interesting that Poroshenko's party actually won in most of the local areas. And Tymoshenko, who is Poroshenko's great opponent, and who the opinion polls suggest would be the winner if there was a free election in Ukraine now, openly said that she thought those local elections were rigged. And it's very difficult to see how the results could have been the way they were if they were not rigged. And I have to say, I think that's a possibility in the presidential elections that we're going to see in Ukraine soon. So I'm not saying Poroshenko will be re-elected, but I don't think it's inconceivable that he might be, precisely because I don't think we will see anything that remotely approximates to a free vote there.
All right, from Lydia, Alexander, what about Macedonia name being handed to Firom? We did a video on this.
We have indeed.
What are your comments about that?
Well, we have indeed. And may I just again say, I mean, we should look people, you know, we went into that in great detail. It is a disastrous move. It's opposed by most people in Macedonia itself, Firom itself, and for very good reasons. It's going to upset the internal balance in Firom. It is hugely controversial in Greece, where there was a big protest on Sunday against it. And in our video, we said that it might have been 60,000 people. The latest figures suggest it may have been actually 200,000 people. People in Greece feel very, very angry and upset about all of this. It's been done against the wishes of the people of Macedonia and Greece. The people of Macedonia, Firom, did not support this proposal when it was put to them in a referendum, but that referendum outcome was ignored and disregarded, and the Firom government has proceeded with it anyway. It is destabilizing Greece, and it is destabilizing Firom, and it is all being done to fulfill the agenda of bringing Firom into NATO and into the EU in order to prevent a Russian meddling in the Balkans, which does not exist. So, I mean, it is a bad project, however you look at it, being done for a bad purpose.
So what about this question from, I lost the name of the person that asked this, but anyway, if NATO is disbanded, will an EU army be formed?
No, my personal view is this. If NATO is disbanded, I think we will see the end of the EU, because to my mind, they're Siamese twins. I think that they are so interconnected with each other that the disappearance of NATO will cause more and more states within Europe to start thinking about going their own way. And I think instead of an EU army, what we will start to see is the breakup, an accelerated breakup of the EU, with more and more countries starting to forge independent foreign policies. That is my own view. I mean, I appreciate there are alternative views, but I don't think most people, most countries in Europe will exchange the hegemony of the United States through NATO for the hegemony of Germany through the EU. I think that is too much for most European countries already.
Does what's happening in the Balkans right now, Alexander, worry you? We did a video on Serbia, Putin's visit to Serbia. We have now this recent news about the FYROM and the Republic of North Macedonia. What's going on there?
Yes.
I don't know. I've just got a bad feeling in my stomach when I'm thinking about what's happening in the Balkans.
Well, I have the same bad feeling in my stomach.
Very bad feeling.
Very bad feeling. I mean, can I repeat first of all? I mean, what NATO has achieved in the Balkans is that it has created a very angry and aggrieved Serbia, which is the most powerful country in the Western Balkans, and it has surrounded that angry and aggrieved Serbia with unstable microstates, Bosnia, FYROM, Kosovo, against all of which this angry Serbia has grievances. It has now compounded that by giving Greece a grievance against FYROM. It has also done this in a way that, there's also grievances between Albania and FYROM. Albanian nationalism, which is a potent force, has been strengthened and is very destabilizing. And of course, strengthened by
Turkey,
exactly. And of course, we've also got conflicts now with Bulgaria, which feels very, very sensitive about the situation in FYROM, and which also has a large Turkish minority. So I think this is an extremely explosive situation. My own prediction is that sooner or later it will blow. I don't know when. I don't know in what way, but I don't think this situation is stable at all. And I think Western policy is making it less stable by the month and by the year. So sooner or later, we're going to see a major crisis in the Balkans of a kind that will dwarf the one we saw when Yugoslavia was broken up in the 1990s. I think that one should look upon the Balkans with great foreboding.
From VLA Bog wants to know, what do you think about Vučić? Will he recognize Kosovo?
Well, I think Vučić is a strange person because on the one hand, he is, of course, comes from a nationalist background in Yugoslavia and Serbia, but of course, he's now trying as hard as he can to develop relations with the EU and with the West, and whilst at the same time keeping up some kind of connection to Russia. And he seems to have a good personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. I don't think he can keep this balancing act indefinitely. I think it's a wire act which will eventually fail. And I think that his attempt to carry out some kind of land swap with Kosovo, which will lead to the recognition of Kosovo by Serbia, I think is going to be very controversial and unpopular indeed with many people in Serbia. Now, my own personal view, which I know is not popular with many people, is that land swaps have to happen, not necessarily just in Kosovo, but throughout this region. I think Bosnia, the Serbs of Bosnia, and in other places, in Kosovo certainly, should be allowed to join Serbia. I think that is inevitable at some point. It's got to happen.
Repeat that. The Serbs in Bosnia and in
Kosovo
should be allowed to join Serbia.
Should be allowed to join Serbia. I think that is inevitable. Now, whether Serbia wants a large Albanian population with it, in other words, wants to see Kosovo reunited in its entirety, I think perhaps Serb people, when they think about this, might decide that may not be in their own interests. But obviously, there are large areas of Kosovo which are very important to the Serb people, and which I think that has to be taken into account. And when I say land swaps, I don't just mean the land that Vučić is talking about. I think it would have to be, in the end, if this was going to work, be much more extensive than that.
All right. Thank you, Laura, for your super chat. Really appreciate it. And Hersey would like to know about the Press TV anchor. We talked about it. Her name is Merzia Hashemi. I don't know if you want to comment on. You didn't give a comment on Alexander. Do you want to comment on the Press TV anchor?
I'm going to say this again. We don't yet know very much about the story because things have been kept so secret. But it does seem to me, and I come back to what I said before, if this is all about targeting somebody with an Iranian name who works for Press TV, which is an Iranian television company, simply because, you know, they work for that company, that is a major, major step in the United States, restricting free speech, restricting the access of journalists, and it would be an unprecedented violation of the First Amendment and of human rights. And I think if that is indeed what we're looking at, and I'm afraid it possibly is, then we really need to be active about this and push back on it. We need to follow this story carefully, and let's hope that the worst will not come to be true, but I'm afraid it probably will.
All right, Douglas, thank you for your super chat. Great chat as always, in-depth analysis on all issues that you will never see in mainstream media. Thank you very much, Douglas. And Laura, please provide any source materials relevant to your commentary. Laura, Alexander puts pretty much every day all the articles that he's reading, and he links them up on the Duran.com. So you could find all the information there as well. Alexander, you want to keep going for about another 5-10 minutes?
Absolutely, let's do so.
All right, let's do so, Alexander.
It's stimulating. It's getting all these questions.
The questions today are great. I mean, it's just such a great chat. Alexander, Peter's not here, and I wish he was, because I want to talk about Trudeau, China, and Huawei.
Oh my God!
And Peter always gives the best Trudeau commentary, but what's going on? Yeah, what's going on here? I mean, is this going to get resolved?
Well, I'm glad.
Well, it's escalating.
Well, it is escalating. And can I just say, I mean, I linked to an article. You can find it on the website, in which it talked about Trudeau, an interesting man. Let's start with that. Biting off more of the dragon than he can chew, and I attached to it a picture of a very angry Chinese dragon. I think that. I don't know what's going to happen with this Chinese finance officer. I think sooner or later she's going to find her way back to China. But the damage that Trudeau has done to Canada and to Canada's interests is huge, because the Chinese will not forget this and will not forgive this. I've been reading some of the commentary about this in the Chinese news media, and it is furious. The Chinese are furious about this. And who are they blaming? They are blaming Trudeau on the principle that, you don't go for the organ grinder, you go for his monkey. You can respect the organ grinder, but you have no respect for his monkey. And it is his monkey, the organ grinder being, of course, the United States. It is his monkey that Trudeau has made himself out to be. So what a disgrace what a shame for Canada, what a tragic error it was for Trudeau to go down this route.
Yeah, Canada is usually a stalwart, one of the best countries on the diplomatic side of things.
Absolutely.
They have a history of it, yeah.
All the way back. I mean, we could remember, you come from a diplomatic family, Alex. I mean, the great role, for example, that Canada played in resolving the 1956 Suez crisis, when it took a principled position, which finally created a consensus within the United Nations, ended that crisis, brought about the creation of United Nations peacekeeping forces. I mean, Canada was right at the forefront of all of this. And I remember Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, what a consummate diplomat he was. And you can see this about so many other people. Canada was always a major diplomatic force in the world, and a force for good. And to see this foolish and vain prime minister throwing all that away in order to satisfy the United States' anti-competitive urges against Huawei and its present trade policies and hostility to China, for a Canada to get itself mixed up in all of this is tragic for anybody who has the warm feelings for Canada that I have always had.
All right, let's keep it going. We got some good questions going. Alexander from Liam, Duran, what are your thoughts about Imran Khan? Imran Khan?
No, I do indeed. Of course, he was a very important cricketer for a long time, and of course, the British know him because, of course, the British know all about cricket and they know all about him from all of that. I think he's an interesting person. I mean, he is a more secular figure in Pakistan. I know secular-minded Pakistanis in Britain, including a friend of mine who is an investment banker, who are quite keen on him for that reason. I think, though, his first moves have been disappointing for some because he seems to be tilting more to the US than some people expected. But he has to deal with some very difficult economic problems in Pakistan at the moment. So, you know, let's give him a little time. My own personal view is he's an interesting man. He has support within Pakistan. I don't think he's going to be able to change Pakistan fundamentally because the realities of Pakistan are so deep and so structural, with an army that is very powerful and has dominated the political system, with very entrenched corruption, with powerful dynasties controlling the political system. I think that in the end, he's too much of an outsider to make a difference.
All right, Path to Autonomy, thank you for your super chat. The people of the Balkans should work on keeping their young and educated people instead of grabbing land in which nobody really wants to live.
Yes, I think that is entirely correct. But one has to come back to this. If an outside power like the United States and the EU interfere in the Balkans and start changing borders, and it's important to stress, it was the Western powers that changed the borders in the Balkans. It was they who facilitated the breakup of Yugoslavia. It was they who in 1999 bombed Yugoslavia in order to engineer the secession of Kosovo. If these powers interfere in the way they are doing and change borders and meddle in the internal policies of these countries, and in the case of Greece, try to micromanage the economy of Greece in a way that has proved disastrous for the Greek people, not only will people leave, but the political situation will become destabilized and we could see war in the Balkans. So one mustn't blame people in the Balkans exclusively for their problems when, as I said, there is so much external interference in their affairs.
All right. Refe, thank you for your super chat. Love your podcast. From VA whistleblower Taref Simon. Google, thank you very much. We will Google it. We'll check it out. And Alexander from Jedi Mind, have you already talked about the New York Times publishing the FBI coup against Trump? New York Times, BuzzFeed, all the stuff that they're throwing at Trump. We have not discussed it, Jedi Mind, but you know what? Now is a good time to go
it's an excellent
time, because there's a lot to discuss there on everything they're throwing at Trump. It's
indeed
terrible.
It's
terrible what they're throwing at Trump.
Well, indeed, we've done several videos on it, but can we just say, I mean, it is terrible what they're throwing at Trump. And what is more interesting is that it is becoming more and more fictional. So we had this FBI investigation going back to 2016. Trump is a Russian agent, absolute nonsense. And instead of the New York Times leading that story, I mean, I think it was an important story to break, by the way, that there wasn't this FBI investigation apparently separate from the Russiagate investigation itself. But that there was an FBI investigation with people like, who knows, Peter Strzok possibly, looking to prove that Donald Trump was a spy, a Russian spy, which is insane. But I mean, instead of the New York Times leading on the fact that that there was this investigation and that investigation came up with nothing, they buried the fact that it came up with nothing. I think at the end of something like the 9th paragraph, I mean, you have to go far down that article to see that. And it was spun. That story was spun not to show up the misconduct of people in the FBI, which is what that story really is all about. It was spun instead to cause damage to Donald Trump. And now we've had it capped with this utterly nonsensical story by BuzzFeed, based on, you know, Michael Cohen's supposed revelations about Donald Trump causing him to lie to Congress. And, you know, we've done a video, Alex and I, which we've talked about what utter nonsense that was. And Mueller, most unusually, comes out and denies it. So what happens? BuzzFeed doubles down on the story, and Adam Schiff says he's going to investigate it. I mean, you know, they have a denial from Mueller, and they're still plugging it as if it was true. I mean, it seems to me that not only has this thing become unreal and a hoax, which it always was, and you know, a witch hunt, which it always was, but these people are becoming desperate, frankly, because I mean, they're now creating stories, spinning stories out of nothing, and they're going against what Mueller himself says. And you know, I wonder what even Mueller is thinking now. I mean, he must be saying to himself that this thing is now out of control.
Yeah, Sarah said they're all nuts. And Ruby's 200 says the New York Times reported that the FBI investigation, its conclusion back on October 31st, 2016. Exactly what you said, Alexander. They just wanted to respin it.
Exactly. I mean, you know, I mean, that was the story. The story was that the FBI initiated an absurd investigation which came up with nothing. The New York Times spins it as if, you know, there was something seriously to investigate. I mean, this is complete news manipulation, in my opinion, of the worst kind.
Yeah, it's incredible how bulletproof Trump is, though. I mean, he's getting hit on all sides, but he continues to go on, and that's, you just can't help but think that sooner or later all of this is just going to completely boomerang on all these guys in the mainstream media news.
Well, I think that's right, because ultimately, of course, Mueller has to provide a report, and it's going to be very interesting to see what is in that report, because up to now, he has come out with nothing. I mean, he's indicted. I mean, he's not indicted. He's got guilty convictions against Manafort and Flynn and Papadopoulos
on tax evasion.
On tax evasion against Manafort, on lying to his own investigators against Papadopoulos and Flynn. I mean, what he has totally failed to do is prove this collusion thing, and the reason he's unable to prove it is because it doesn't exist. So at some point, Mueller is going to have to say that, it seems to me. I mean, even Mueller can't call black white. I mean, he might try, but I mean, at some point, it's going to become obvious that this investigation is coming up with nothing. And it seems to me that these attempts to spin these nonsensical stories are further proof of that. I mean, you know, the people are starting to sense in the media, in BuzzFeed, in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, elsewhere, that there is no there. You know, there's nothing there. That this is you know, there's not going to be proof that they're looking for. Go ahead.
Can I run something by you? I think that Mueller spoke out this time, not because he was trying to, you know, speak for the greater good, or trying to set the story straight, or trying to be this upstanding citizen that people, you know, say he is, a man of integrity, utmost integrity. I think he spoke out this time about the BuzzFeed fake news because William Barr will soon be heading up the DOJ, and Mueller senses that when Barr comes in, he's going to do exactly what Jeff Sessions and, of course, Rod Rosenstein never did do. He will provide some oversight on the Mueller investigation, and he's going to clamp down on Mueller pretty much just running rampant and just, doing whatever the hell he wants to try and dismantle and, for lack of a better word, overthrow the Trump presidency. I can't think of another word. He's trying to. He's actively trying to impeach Trump.
Well, this is exactly what I mean. That's we had the question before about why isn't Trump being impeached now? I think you are absolutely right. I mean, I know there are criticisms by many people that that he's spoken out too much in favor of executive power and that he didn't play a good role.
Or he's part of the deep state. He's an insider.
Exactly.
He was in the Bush administration, which is true.
Exactly. Which is all of which is true. I mean, I'm not in any way denying that. None of us are. But the fact of the matter is, unlike Rosenstein, unlike Sessions, he is not compromised. He is an extremely capable lawyer. I mean, he knows his law, and I don't think he's going to have any truck with this nonsense. I mean, his memo, which we discussed in one of our videos, in which he basically trashed Mueller's whole obstruction of justice line of investigation, I think shows this. And I think you're absolutely right. We're going to finally see someone take control and bring this runaway train to a stop, or at least put it back on its tracks, which urgently needs to happen.
All right. And Danko says, remember that Mueller lied under oath to Congress about the Iraq war. That is true. Well, let's not forget that Mueller was the FBI head who said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. You can never forget that.
Absolutely. I mean, he's very implicated in all of this. And I mean, there have been various attempts to try and, claim that he somehow resisted some of the things that George W. Bush's administration was up to. I mean, it turns out none of that is true. I mean, or if to the extent that it is true, it is wildly exaggerated. Mueller is a very, very implicated man, very compromised, and one should not forget that at all.
All right. And on that note, I think we have covered everything that's going on in the news cycle, or most everything. Let's wrap it up for this live chat, guys. Thank you for coming out and joining us on this chat. Thank you to Alexander Mercouris. Thank you to Peter Lavelle, who had to leave early, but thank you, Peter, as well. Guys, it was a great live chat. Remember to hit that like button, smash that like button, subscribe to the site, guys. Tell your friends about the channel as well. Help us grow, help us reach a bigger audience. Thank you very much for your questions and your super chats. Today's questions were amazingly good. They were just really, really good questions, and we enjoyed this chat very much. Alexander, what are you looking at for the week ahead in news?
Well, first of all, I mean, I have to look, as I live in Britain, to this Brexit nightmare. And we're going to have lots of plots and conspiracies. As I said on our program, I don't think they're going to amount to anything, but I have to keep an eye on all of that, obviously. The other big thing, the really big story for me, is going to be the meeting between Erdogan and Putin in Moscow on the 23rd of January. I think that is going to set the direction of where the Syrian conflict is going. I think that's a major event. Then, I mean, we've also got to consider what further revelations there's going to be in Russia. I predict we're now in the season for nonsense stories, and I suspect we're going to get more of them, and we will see that. And then, last but not least, something we didn't talk about in our program today. All the indications are that the Yellow Vests protest is getting bigger. Apparently, there were 86,000 people out this weekend. It's becoming more violent in the sense that the police are becoming more violent against these protests, as one of our questioners said. And I predict we're going to get an even bigger protest this weekend, probably more violence, and we will have to keep an eye on this and see where it's all going.
The Yellow Vest is not dying down. Macron is in big, big trouble.
Indeed so. Absolutely. Exactly so.
And what do you think is going to happen if something goes wrong in Brexit? You're going to have the UK and the Yellow Vests in France. You're going to have these two major pillars of Europe, two citizens in these major pillars of Europe, very extremely angry at what's going on.
Indeed, so, and I think a point which I made once on another live, which is that of course Britain and France are two very interesting countries because of course there's lots of rivalry between them and there's cultural differences, but they're very, very close, and people in Britain do follow very carefully what goes on in France, and I think that there are a lot of very angry people in Britain who see this extraordinary display of self-indulgence in the British Parliament and these attempts by people in the British Parliament to sabotage Brexit, which was voted for in a democratic referendum, which the political class said it would honour. If it isn't honoured, then I can easily see people in Britain taking their cue from what is happening in France, and you could see protests in Britain, and maybe not initially on that kind of scale, and politics in Britain takes a different course, but we will see lots going on in Britain if that happens.
All right, and everyone's asking what's going to happen. Are we going to be Sunday or Monday next week? We don't know yet, guys. We're working on some scheduling stuff. We're working to figure out the best time to do this show for you guys as well as for us. We will let you know what day we're going to be. We are either going to be a Sunday or a Monday. We do hope that you guys like the Monday show, and we hope that it was not an inconvenience for anybody. And we're really, really happy to have you with us, whether it's on a Sunday or on a Monday. We will let you know ahead of time when the next live chat will be, which day. And we're still trying to work out that scheduling, the scheduling for those live shows, but we will let you know. We appreciate you guys turning out for us. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London, thank you very, very much. Peter Lavelle in Moscow, thank you very, very much, guys. Thank you. We hope you have a great Sunday wherever you are in the world. Take care. Until next time, guys.